Hello, I'm Deputy Foreign Editor Albert Wai, and you're listening to Asian Insider. The episode this week is on China Victory Day Parade. It was to commemorate the 80th anniversary of World War II and captured global attention on September the 3rd. We will be talking about what stood out during the event and the geopolitical implications. With me again today is ST's senior correspondent covering China, Ms. Yew Lun Tian. Like all other members of the press, she was asked to report at 2:30 a.m. in the morning, the night before the event, due to the security arrangements. And she will tell us all about what she saw, as well as her analysis following the event.
Hello, Albert. Thanks for having me. Wow, it was really quite an experience to be almost part of the parade because we were made to sit on the Tiananmen Square where the cameras would fly by. You would see us as part of those digits of the participants of the parade. But anyway, yeah, we were all quite dark after that morning. And so it's quite an experience.
I usually start my podcast with a dummy question. So here it goes. What is the big deal about this whole parade, Lun Tian?
Okay. So let's start from the beginning, a little history lesson. So on September 2nd, 1945, Japan formally surrendered to the Allies aboard the mothership USS Missouri, which was anchored in Tokyo Bay. And China later designated September 3rd, the next day, as the day to commemorate its victory in World War II. So this year, Beijing marked the occasion with a very impressive military parade. So what's striking about this is that this is actually a fairly recent practice. Although the war ended 80 years ago, it is only the second time that China has celebrated it with a full-scale parade. So the first time was 10 years ago, a few years later, after President Xi came to power. Before that, the Chinese leaders tended to mark the anniversary in a low-key way.
So, Lun Tian, when you look at what happened on September 3rd, you compare it with what happened 10 years ago. Were there any major differences?
So one of the major differences and why people were all talking about it this year is because the weapons on display this year were more and more impressive than the last time. So, for example, for the first time, China showcased what experts call a nuclear triad, which means nuclear weapons that can be deployed from land, air, and sea.
Yeah, like you said, a lot of military hardware was on display that day. So can you give us a rough sense of what they were and what stood out?
Right. So for the first time, China showcased what experts call a nuclear triad, which means nuclear weapons that can be deployed from land, air, and sea. So, for example, from the land-based missiles, China unveiled 3 upgraded Dongfeng, which is the East Wind intercontinental ballistic missiles. And these missiles, the scary thing about them is that they can potentially hit anywhere in continental United States. And beyond nuclear weapons, what caught most people's attention was how futuristic the new weapons were. So, for example, there were the so-called robot WUs, which were 4-legged unmanned ground vehicles. So they can potentially scout with onboard cameras, carry supplies across rough terrain, and perhaps even mount weapons. So watching them, a song popped into my head. Can you guess what song was it?
No, but before you tell me about the song, why are they called robot wolves, not dogs or
because
something else?
Yeah, because they're bigger than dogs. Which means they can mount more things, they can carry more things, and they are steadier than dogs. And so the song on my head was, "Who let the dogs out?" Okay, yeah, that was. Okay.
Well, maybe they should have called them robot dogs, which were my instinct. Okay, on to the next question. So let's talk a little bit about the foreign leaders who were in attendance. A lot of focus on who turned up and who didn't. So what is the significance in terms of the representation of the world leaders?
Okay. So 26 heads of states or government came, but all eyes were on mostly 2 men. Russian President Vladimir Putin, who was wanted by the International Criminal Court over alleged war crimes in Ukraine, and Mr. Kim Jong-un, the supreme leader from the reclusive North Korea. So by having the two men flank Mr. Xi on the Gate of Heavenly Peace as they watched the parade, Beijing signaled that it is happy to share the spotlight with leaders that the West would rather keep off the stage. What really caught make a lot of media and people excited was there was this rare hot mic moment between Xi and Putin. Both 72, they were overheard musing that with biotech and organ transplants, humans might one day live to 150 years old or even forever. So that was what was striking about the leaders who turned up.
Let's talk about one of the Southeast Asian leaders. Indonesian President Prabowo was there, wasn't he? And he got a prime seat right next to President Putin of Russia. Were you surprised by this?
Yeah, we had thought that he wouldn't come because he had to deal with a lot of violent protests at home. But he did, at Beijing's very strong request. He flew in on the morning of the parade and stayed for about 8 hours. So for that effort, and also because he was the leader of ASEAN's biggest country, he was rewarded with a prime seat next to Putin, just one seat away from Mr. Xi. So out of the 10 ASEAN members, 6 head of states or government turned up, and Singapore was instead represented by Deputy Prime Minister Gan Kim Yong.
I also want to talk a little bit about those who didn't turn up. Well, President Donald Trump didn't turn up. Did you expect him to in the first place?
We would have liked him to. That would make the picture very exciting, the three of them, the four strongmen. But no, Mr. Trump, of course, he didn't show up, because if he were to show up, it would mean he somehow validates China's narratives about the parade and the war. But he made sure that everybody knew that he was watching. So he posted on Truth Social, almost even while the parade was happening or just when it ended. He says, "Please give my warmest regards to Putin and Kim as you conspire against the United States of America." And he was also sounded a bit unhappy that China didn't acknowledge enough or didn't thank US enough for what it did during the war. He mentioned that US gave massive amount of support and blood to help China secure its freedom. So that's him.
Why does the Chinese Communist Party keep harping on World War II history, Lun Tian? So what message was it sending with this display, especially when it comes to how it relates to the domestic audience?
Yeah, that's a really important question, because the whole point of doing the parade domestically facing is very important for the Communist Party. The World War II isn't just about history. It's a part of their claim to the legitimacy to rule China even now. So by retelling the war of this, their story of this war of resistance against Japan, the party is reminding its own people that it is the one that stood up to foreign invasion and ended a century of humiliation and restored national dignity. And so the parade dramatized the message, which is, look how far we've come. We were victims of aggressor, and now we are a great power with advanced missiles and drones. So it's also telling the Chinese people that the party had not only protected the nation in the past, but it is strong enough to protect it now.
So you were there on the ground. Were the Chinese people genuinely excited by the proceedings?
Yeah, I imagine the overall mood is one of excitement and pride. We see like parents bringing young children to come, and everybody was dying to take photos of themselves with the parade in the background and to post on social media. It's like a great stamp of honor to be there. I guess for most people, it's good to feel dignified and to be a victor, and especially when in the current state where China is in a strategic competition with US, people want to have something to make them feel that they can win and not be so-called the loser that they were after the Opium War in the 1840s and that 100 years after that.
Tell us a bit more about the reporting process from your perspective? You had to assemble at 2:30 a.m., like I said earlier. Why so early? What did they make all the journalists do for so many hours before the parade started?
Okay. Yeah, that was quite harrowing to ensemble at 2:30, and the night before we were all rushing stories, so basically we didn't sleep, and because we were so worried that we would miss the time, we were just there even before 2:30. So what happened is China is very good at organizing massive events, but how it makes sure that everything happens with precision and nothing goes wrong is they just make sure that everybody comes beforehand, goes through layers and layers of security check. So, for example, we were told that we cannot bring food and water in. So, okay, granted, right? We don't want they don't want us to dirty the stands. But we realized when we were going through the security checks that we cannot even bring lipstick or lip balm or sunscreen. So even though it was 2:30 a.m. and it was all dark at that time, people were applying the sunscreen on their face because they knew that they had to surrender the sunscreen at the security check. I guess they just didn't want any liquid or whatever to spoil the parade.
So you were seated with the media contingent, right? If I understand correctly.
Yes.
So there must have been journalists from all over the world. So what were the other journalists saying to you?
Right. Actually, next to me, around me, there were some Japanese journalists. So it was actually quite interesting to observe what they were doing. They were actually very professional. They were doing what we were doing. They were reporting what's happening, as the rest of us. Even though it's obvious that the so-called target of the parade is Japan. I guess we also have a lot other Western journalists, and so their reaction to the parade was also quite interesting. It's hard to be very excited as the local people, because we were all very, very hot, and we actually couldn't really see very well. So for them, it was more of watching the parade with a cool detachment and trying to analyze what these mean for the rest of the world.
Among the Chinese people, what sort of emotions do they associate with the World War II these days? Are we talking about anger, hatred, or do you see resentment? So how are people digesting the messages that are being sent out by the government?
I'm not sure if I have an authoritative answer to this. If you look at the polls, Chinese people perception of Japanese people has gone down over the years, and partly related to the historical legacy of the World War II. And every time when, especially at special moments like this, commemorative moments where the state would remind the people of the atrocities committed by Japan 80 years ago, it would naturally whip up some negative emotions about it. And to be fair to the Chinese people, they did suffer a lot during the war. Many people died, and very horrible things were done to them. And this is not too far ago. It's probably like 3 generations or 4 generations for many people. So it's still quite raw for many people. But I guess there are some people who would also like to look forward, but these voices are just not so convenient to be said in public at these commemorative moments.
So the Grand Parade, let's set that aside. Can you tell us a little bit more about the other initiatives by the Chinese government in terms of national messaging, national education? There was some exhibition and there were some movies, if I understand correctly, that had quite a bit of public attention.
Right. So it's kind of like what I said earlier, that the parade is meant for the CCP, very specifically the CCP, the Communist Party of China, to show its people that it won the war. It fought the war for the Chinese people and it won the war. So why is this important? Is because actually the KMT, the other party at the time, which is actually the ruling party at the time, also fought the war. But the CCP is using the war to remind its people that it is the rightful ruler for them now because they contributed so much during the war. That's one message. Another message that sort of got through to some people was you may remember a few years ago there were some purges in the military where some generals were corrupted, and some of these generals were those responsible for procuring and developing military equipment. So what this parade does is it put to rest any speculation or gossip that these purges had set back or demoralized the PLA, because instead what it showed off was a military that looks formidable, straight out of the future and ready to fight.
How does China's World War II narrative differ from the rest of the world, including Singapore? I mean, you wrote about it in a follow-up story, but I thought it'd be useful just to have a quick recap for those who might not have read the story.
So how China thinks of World War II, it's a two-part thing. First, it is the Chinese people's war of resistance against Japanese aggression, which is what we said earlier about the CCP solidifying the CCP's legitimacy to rule in China. That's for the domestic audience. And the second part of it, they call it the global war against fascism. So by characterizing the war like that, they are setting themselves up as a contributor, a major contributor to something that is a global effort against fascism. And they are putting themselves as the opposite of fascism. So with this war, the message that they are telling to the outside world is that we are a force for good. We are a defender of peace. And we are the ones who are against fascism. However you want to understand what is fascism, yeah. So they are building. So they use this to say that's why they have the moral authority to then propose a new world order using under the Global Governance Initiative that President Xi brought up at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit a few days before the parade.
I want to talk a little bit about Taiwanese reactions. Do you think Taiwan would have been shell shocked or concerned by this display of force by the mainland?
Right. Probably not shell shocked, but definitely concerned. Some of the weapons displayed at the parade could have implications in a conflict over Taiwan. So, for example, Beijing unveiled for the first time this underwater drone, which looks like a giant torpedo about as long as one MRT carriage. So the drone is designed to lay mines in waters, such as potentially the Taiwan Strait. And then there was China's third and largest aircraft carrier, the Fujian, which was pointedly named after the province facing Taiwan. So, of course, we know the aircraft carrier is too large to parade down Chang'an Avenue. So what happened instead was it sailed through the Taiwan Strait on September 12th in a show of strength. So this move bridged the gap between parade spectacle and real deployment. Analysts expect this aircraft carrier to be officially commissioned into the PLA Navy soon.
Well, but the West didn't seem that interested in the Grand Parade. So how different is the narrative from, for instance, Europe? And how would they read China's narrative?
Right. So no major Western leader showed up at the September 3rd parade. So this is perhaps because they do not want to endorse China's narrative. To many in the West, it felt ironic to preach peace while rolling tanks and missiles, down Tiananmen. Instead, the commemorations that they held, and they chose the date May 8th, were in Europe. That was a very different style. It was wreath laying, speeches, and solemn remembrance. The Western narrative of World War II stresses reconciliation, the dangers of militarism, and the building of institutions like NATO and EU to keep the peace. So by contrast, China's story centers on sacrifices, humiliation, and revival. And today it folds the history into a show of military strength. So some Western observers would read Beijing's parade as not just commemoration, but also projection, signaling that the Communist Party legitimacy rests on the wartime role and that China is now strong enough to shape the world order.
Lun Tian, a few days before the parade, China hosted the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SCO, summit. And 2 weeks after the parade, there was a Xiangshan Defense Forum in Beijing, which you covered as well. So if you look at these three big events as a package, what does it tell us about China's foreign policy preoccupations at the moment?
Right. I think in short, the SCO, the parade, and Xiangshan, there were three acts in the same play. And the play was to show that China has friends, has muscles, and a vision for a new security order. So how this trilogy goes is that at the SCO summit in Tianjin, Mr. Xi launched the Global Governance Initiative, let's call it the GGI. So this is his solution for how to save multilateralism that he said has been eroded by US President Donald Trump. Maybe he didn't say it, he didn't name Donald Trump, but that's the underlying message. So a few days later, when many of the leaders who went to the SCO summit also showed up at the parade, it was an endorsement of China's narrative about World War II and to show that they are on China's side when it comes to reinterpreting history and the current. And so then this leads us to the Xiangshan Forum, where that's the first chance that foreign scholars can publicly challenge China's narrative that has been laid out at the SCO and as the parade. And so there was quite a lot of very heated exchange at Xiangshan Forum this year.
I've been meaning to ask you about the GGI, or the Global Governance Initiative, because I'm not quite clear what is it. So can you tell us a bit more? What exactly is the GGI and how concrete is it?
Okay. So like all the concepts that China has launched in recent years, it's meant to be initially very vague and abstract to hold a lot of things inside. And then after their launch, they expect that these initiatives will be fleshed out by, as the leaders of more countries come and talk to China, as China announce more projects. These initiatives will become clearer and clearer to everyone. But as of now, what China says about this GGI is that because the UN multilateral system is not working, with protectionism that we see some countries having, China wants to reform the global system. And so it has proposed that this global system should have certain principles, such as a respect for sovereign equality, which means you respect the sovereignty of every country, big and small, including what they want to do with their own people, which means other countries should not interfere. It's also a reaffirmation of this idea of multilateralism, and I think that's the main thing for the GGI.
So when I look ahead at the horizon right now, Lun Tian, so the next major events we are looking at will be the APEC forum in South Korea, right? And possibly a scheduled meeting between President Xi and President Trump somewhere in Asia. So when you look at what's happened in the past few weeks, has Xi strengthened his hand against Trump ahead of these key meetings?
Yeah, that is the next thing to look out for, and we're all very excited to see how that plays out. I think one thing that needs to the best discussing is how what China has been doing in this past month with the parade and the SCO and with the Xiangshan. It's narrative shaping, which has some value in itself. But ultimately, when it comes to, let's say, bilateral negotiations or talks or between two countries, it's more whether each country has more strength or leverage. It's a real thing that is not that sometimes is a bit immune to whatever sort of nice build up or narrative build up to that. So we shall see. I guess whether Xi has a stronger hand when he talks to Trump, a lot more might depend on how well the two economies are doing comparatively. How well or how bad, which would means how badly each side would want to do. I guess that's what we can look out for in future.
And that's a wrap for this episode. For China watchers, I'm sure they will remember the September Day parade for a long time to come. I'm sure I will. And for Lun Tian, this attending the parade would be a story that she can recount to her friends and colleagues next time. So you've been listening to Asian Insider. I'm Albert Wai. If you like what you heard, please share this podcast with your friends and family. This episode was produced and edited by Faiza Sani. Thank you for listening.